a continuing objection to reference to victim, because that's what this trial is about. And there's some Court of Appeals case law, and if I'm recalling correctly, it's more having to do with child sexual offense and that type of thing, but the same principle applies. If the jury is to determine who is there a victim here, certainly there's the officer was wounded, he received an injury, but repeatedly referring to someone as a victim, and it seems, from my perspective, if the court allows that, then the court is, without saying anything, it's akin to having an opinion. I know it's not an opinion, but my argument is that we would have a continuing objection to the use of the word victim. And instead of me popping up every time I'm just making that now. I guess when it happens, I'll do it in front of the jury, but just to make those two things, once the jury's out, just make those observations, those objections.
Thank you. The first objection is overruled, and the second objection is likewise overruled. To the extent I can, I consider that a continuing objection because it references are made that way. I do note that pattern jury instruction uses the word victim on throughout many of the pattern jury instructions. Just for your information, I might miss one, but what I do is put alleged victim throughout pattern jury instructions as well. I'm just, the motions and objections are denied. Anything else before the jury returns? Anything in addition to that?
Nothing from the state room.
Thank you, Sheriff. If we'll get the jurors back in their seats then. Let the record reflect all our jurors have returned. State's argument is witness.
Your Honor, at this time, the state would call Officer Davidson to the stand.
Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you shall now give the court in the case being heard shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thanks, sir. Could you you please state your name and occupation for the court?
Charles Davidson, I'm a sergeant with the Durham Police Department.
Sergeant, how long have you been so employed with the Durham Police Department?
21 and a half years.
And what did you do before becoming a patrol officer with the Durham Police Department?
I was in college, bachelor's degree in criminal justice,
And where was that?
Western Carolina.
Go Cardinals. And so what year did you start with the police department?
1994.
And what were your duties when you first came to the police department?
I started as a patrol officer after academy.
And what is your current station at the police department?
I'm a sergeant in the District 1 Investigations Unit.
And can you tell me what duties that you have to complete for that role?
I supervise 7 individuals that are responsible for various property crimes, violent crimes that result in no death for District 1.
And can you describe for me 2 things? A, what District 1 is, and 2, what CID is.
Okay, CID is Criminal Investigations Division, and District 1 is basically the eastern portion of Durham.
And are you familiar with how the Durham Police Department breaks up and divides the units in patrol in Durham?
As far as just patrol or the whole police department?
The whole police department.
Yes.
Okay, and how many divisions are there?
Oh, we have headquarters criminal investigations, which comprises homicide, special victims, domestic violence, and fraud. Then we have all the district investigations units. There are 5 of those that basically cover everything the 4 units at headquarters don't cover. And then there's an abundance of units at headquarters involving everything from IA to narcotics, recruiting, training, and then of course you have all the patrol functions throughout the city.
Okay, and you stated that there were 5 districts. Can
Yes.
you tell me about the geography of those 5 districts?
Basically downtown is District 5, it's the central district, and then going from east counterclockwise you have 1, 2, 3, and 4 that are kind of pie shaped to encompass the rest of the city.
Now, were you with CID back in December 18th, 2012?
No, I was not. I was the patrol sergeant for District 1 on B Squad.
And what were your duties as patrol sergeant for District 1?
Basically to oversee all the patrol functions for that squad.
And where is the geographical location of District 1?
Eastern.
And can you give us kind of border roads or boundaries that are identifiable?
The easiest way would be basically everything between 85 and the freeway, as far east all the way to almost Raleigh city limits off of Leesville, which we now encompass over there with Del Webb's new neighborhood.
And sir, did you come in contact, or can you tell me about your duties on 12/18/2012? What were your hours of operation?
That day it would have been day shift, which was 6 a.m. to 6 p.m.
Was that a normal shift?
Yes, we work rotating shifts.
Was that day a normal day for you?
It's a day shift, yes, a normal day shift.
Okay. Did anything unusual happen on that day?
It's patrol, there's always something unusual, but in regards to this case, we had the call come out for a scene with a possible shooting of an officer. So at that point, the majority of our district went to the area. In District 2, we left a couple behind to handle the things in our district, and we started circulating for a suspect vehicle description that was given out.
And do you recall that suspect vehicle that you were circulating for?
Burgundy car, but I don't remember the specific details.
And were you able to locate that burgundy vehicle?
I did not.
Were the officers around you able to locate that?
The vehicle was located on Newcastle Road. If you don't mind, I'll put my glasses on for my report. The car was found. I don't specifically know which officer found it. At the time, Sergeant Cates was on scene at 1336 Newcastle Road. He had called command. He asked for me to come to that location and assume command of that neighborhood so that he could deal with CID duties because he was in criminal investigations at the time.
And did you respond to that location?
I did. I responded and arrived there approximately 10:45 that morning and met with Sergeant Cates.
10:45 a.m.?
Yes, ma'am.
And what, if anything, do you recall seeing when you were arriving there?
It was, they had not the command post, but a control post set up for that area. A bunch of officers had already arrived prior to my arrival and were setting up around the building that they suspected the apartment may be and around the parking lot. So there was a large volume of officers there.
Your Honor, objection cumulative as previously argued.
Overruled.
Okay, you stated that when you arrived, that it was about 10:45 a.m. So how long were you on the scene?
According to my notes, I cleared at 11:38 after I turned over the inner perimeter control to Sergeant Kelly. And basically, my duties when I took over from Sergeant Cates was to make sure that there was sufficient perimeter control around the building, that no individuals in plain clothes were around so that everybody was identifiable. While I was setting that up with our patrol rifle officers, the Durham County Sheriff's Department SWAT team arrived, so myself and Lieutenant Cody coordinated his personnel to relieve some of our personnel, especially the patrol officers that were not riflemen, because we still have to take care of the city and answer the other general calls that are coming in. So once that was completed, that was 11:38, I turned the scene over to Sergeant Kelly with our heat team.
Thank you, sir. And can you describe, well, while you were on the scene, do you recall if anybody was apprehended at that scene?
No, nobody was apprehended.
And after you were relieved of that command at about 11:38, what, if anything, did you do next in conjunction with this investigation?
I went back to District 1 at, according to my report, at 13:05 hours, which would have been 1:05. Lieutenant Gaddy asked over the radio for several cars to respond to 1718 Rosetta Avenue in an attempt to locate, I guess they had developed some kind of information that that house was affiliated with the suspect, and for us to go over there.
And did you?
I responded. Upon my arrival to the residence, there was a black Honda Accord parked in front of the residence, aiming away from me, so I was behind it. And then Sergeant Pyatt and Investigator Cook pulled up in front of the vehicle, facing both our vehicles.
And once you arrived and saw that vehicle on the scene, what, if any, actions did you take?
So I got out of my vehicle. Sergeant Pyatt and Investigator Cook began challenging the three occupants of the Honda. At this point, I don't think any of them knew I was sitting behind them. I was in a marked patrol vehicle in uniform. Two gentlemen were complying with Investigator Cook and Sergeant Pyatt's commands. A third individual started kind of sidestepping to the yard. I challenged them to get on the ground. They immediately laid down. And then the three of us kind of did a cover handcuffing until all three subjects were handcuffed safely.
Now, you stated that you were in a marked patrol car and in uniform at this time. Do you recall how Investigator Cook was dressed?
Plain clothes, and they were in Sergeant Pyatt's car, which I believe at the time was an Impala. That was the majority of our unmarked fleet at that time.
And did they have any identification for, or any identifiers for the police department?
Our standard CID is generally just the badge, the gun, and the holster. I don't remember if they had their TAC vests on. We were also issued tactical vests that say police, but I don't have in my notes if they were wearing them or not.
And the same goes for Mr. Pyatt?
Yes, he was CID as well.
And you stated that there were several individuals in the vehicle. Can
Three.
you, did you recall who was where in the vehicle?
I can't recall where Mr. Riley was, but he was the individual that I handcuffed, and I didn't know it was him until I asked him who he was.
Now, you stated that you apprehended a person who was sidestepping into the yard. Could you explain what you mean and the actions to the jury?
Basically, the car was parked, and they just kind of made a couple side steps to kind of distance themselves from the vehicle. He didn't run. He just was moving away from the vehicle for whatever reason. I can't assume why he was moving away from the car. But once I challenged him, he gave a quick glance back, saw me, and immediately laid down.
And is that individual that you challenged and sidestepped from the vehicle in the courtroom here today?
Yes, he's in a black suit with a pink shirt and a pink and black tie.
Your Honor, if the court will note that he did identify the defendant.
For the record, we will reflect that the witness identified Mr. Riley.
And how were you able to ascertain who he was when you had taken him into custody?
As I was handcuffing him, I asked him who he was and gave his name.
And how was he with you on the scene when you took him into custody?
As I was handcuffing him, I noticed some injuries on his left arm and wrist. So once he was handcuffed, there were by this point several other officers had arrived. I don't even remember who they were at that point. Someone else took control of him and walked him over as I called for EMS, and I called at the time Investigator McMaster as well.
And after that was done, what, if anything, happened next?
Investigator McMaster said that he wanted them all at headquarters, and so I walked over to the car. To EMS at this point was checking Mr. Riley's injuries, said that he was going to need stitches. They basically gave him some field treatment and bandaged him up, but said at some point he's going to need stitches. So I relayed that to Investigator McMaster as well, and then they were transported. I wasn't involved with transporting him. I stayed at the house and maintained control of the house until they could get a search warrant for that residence at 1718 Rosetta. And then I cleared from that scene at 3:15 after Sergeant Kelly arrived there with his heat team.
And you stated that they went to get a search warrant?
Yes.
And were they able to obtain a search warrant?
Once Sergeant Kelly got there, I left, so I don't know what, if anything, happened with the search warrant, the search of the house. My duties were done at that point.
Okay. And are you familiar with that area over there?
Yes.
And how are you familiar with that area?
It used to be part of District 1. It's now part of District 2. So just through patrol functions.
I'm going to approach with what the state is going to mark as State's Exhibit number 18. I'm going to show you what's been marked as State's Exhibit number 18. Can you identify that?
It's a overhead satellite map of several blocks surrounding Rosetta Drive.
And are you familiar with that area?
Yes, 1718 Rosetta is identified with a red icon.
And does that map accurately depict the area that you're familiar with?
Yes, ma'am.
And can it help you illustrate your testimony here in court today?
It just shows exactly where we were on that day. Yes, ma'am.
Your Honor, at this time I'd like to introduce State's Exhibit number 18 into evidence.
No objection for illustrative purposes.
Thank you. State's Exhibit number 18 is admitted for illustrative purposes.
And Your Honor, if I may make an adjustment, I believe that's 18A.
Does the officer, does the exhibit have 18A on it?
Permission to approach.
Just 18, sir.
Thank you.
Permission to approach.
You mark that then. Thank you.
And now has the A.
Thank you. State's Exhibit 18A is admitted instead of 18.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you.
You have permission to have the witness publish that exhibit by the overhead.
Allow.
Sir, could you please tell us what we're looking at here?
It's the same map. You'll see 1718 Rosetta marked with the icon, and we were in the street right in front, right about there.
Thank you. Your Honor, that's all the questions for this witness at this time.
Thank you. Mr. Carnes, questions of the witness?
Yes, Your Honor, thank you. Sergeant Davidson, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, sir.
May I approach and take a look at the report or notes the witness was using?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir.
And do you have other materials you've looked at, or is that just the file?
That's just the file folder.
Thank you very much. So you arrested this gentleman, correct?
That's correct. I placed him into custody. I wasn't the charging officer.
All right. And this language challenging, is that basically yelling commands to get down?
Yeah, just advised him to lay on the ground.
And he did so immediately, correct?
Absolutely. Yes, sir.
And he didn't give you any trouble?
No, sir.
And he told you his name?
Yes, sir.
And did you look for ID, or was that someone else's responsibility?
I don't remember if I did or not. Once he gave me the name and, you know, I noticed the injuries, then I just went ahead and called McMaster.
Yes, sir. And based on the radio traffic, you understood that Rosetta Drive is his natural mother's home?
I don't know that that was relayed at the time. That could have come up in some conversation after with other officers that were on scene that they'd been to that house before. But at the time, it was just, can you go to 1718 Rosetta? That's a possible address for the suspect.
And did you receive radio traffic or information that there was communications with his family in order to have him turn himself in?
I don't recall any of that, no.
And the mobile display terminals or mobile display computer, what do you call it?
MDC.
Okay. And were you receiving information in that fashion?
No, the information to go over there came via the radio from Lieutenant Gaddy.
And about this event, did you use the mobile display computer or terminal for any communications?
The earlier call, when everything initially started happening, the best of my recollection, there may have been some tag information that was generated across the MDC, yes, but specifically I don't remember what I typed or if, you know, any back and forth messages, but we do use those as part of being able to look at the call times and notes that are updated.
And that's a pretty useful tool for you, isn't it?
Yes.
And did you receive personally any request to preserve whatever was in your personal computer there?
No, we don't have any control on. We can delete just to delete out of the screen to make it easier for us to scroll through our independent car-to-car messages, but that stuff is cataloged, and any requests for that go through a different division, not the patrol officer.
And those are only kept for a certain amount of time. Is that your understanding?
Yeah, some amount of time, but I don't know the specifics.
One moment.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Thank you. Any questions on redirect?
No questions on redirect, Your Honor.
Thank you, Officer.
Thank you, Your Honor.
We'll call your next witness, please.
Your Honor, at this time, the state will call Officer Cook to the stand.
Thank you.
Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you shall now give in the court in this case shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Sir, could you please state your name and occupation for the court?
My name is Corey Cook. I'm a Durham Police Department investigator.
And sir, how long have you been a police officer with the city of Durham?
Since 2006.
And how long have you been an investigator with the city of Durham?
Since 2009, I believe.
And what did you do before you became a Durham City Police Officer?
I worked at North Carolina Central Police Department. North Carolina Central Police Department.
And how long were you there?
A little over 2 years.
And you stated that you've been an investigator since 2009. Were you an investigator on 12/18/2012?
Yes, ma'am.
And do you recall what your duties were regarding that position on that day?
I was in a domestic violence unit, which I'm currently still an investigator for that unit.
And what are your duties as an investigator with the domestic violence unit?
Basically, my unit is responsible for following up on the domestic cases that our uniform patrol officers respond to, whether there's an arrest or not. We follow up on the case to determine if any further charges or if the victim needs assistance, things of that nature. So that's my responsibility.
Okay. And what was the time of your duty on that day?
I don't recall the time. I want to say it was after lunchtime.
Okay. I'm asking what time that you were on duty. Was it day shift or?
It was day shift. We all day shift, yes, ma'am.
And what are your hours on day shift?
From 8:10 to 4:30. I'm sorry.
No problem. I'm not being very articulate this afternoon.
Nice.
So you were on day shift, and did you have any opportunity to respond to 718 Rosetta Drive on that day?
I did.
And for what reason did you respond there?
Well, that particular day, I was in my office, and there were several other investigators there as well, and we had some radios on. We heard the traffic indicating that there was a gunshot wound call, and an officer was involved, so we responded from our office.
And did you initially respond to 718 Rosetta Drive?
It was a little after the call was dispatched. We started to respond out there.
Do you recall what time that you were that you responded to 718 Rosetta?
I wouldn't say maybe it was a little after 1. I'm not sure exactly
Okay.
the accurate time. I don't know.
And do you recall why you responded there and not the original crime scene?
Well, initially we responded to where the actual call came out at. We didn't respond immediately to Rosetta Drive. We didn't discover that assistance was needed on Rosetta until later.
And how did you receive a request for assistance to Rosetta Drive?
It was radioed through Sergeant Davidson. We were actually communicating through a talk-around channel. Through a talk-around channel that was assigned for the incident. And he requested units to go to that location to assist. And my sergeant and I, we went to that location.
And who was your sergeant at that?
Sergeant Dave Pyatt.
And you stated that you were on a talk-around radio. Could you elaborate on that? Could you tell the jury what that is?
The talk-around channel I'm referring to is it's not police A or police B, where the main communication is given to patrol officers through communications. It's basically a talk-around channel for that district, and it's not over the primary channel. It's mostly used for when officers respond to calls, coordinate how to approach certain scenes, and relay information to other officers that's assisting them.
And which district were you working at this time?
District 2.
And which district did the original call come out to?
District 2.
And the address for that was?
I'm not certain what that exact address was, I'm sorry.
No problem.
There was just a lot going on that day, you know.
I understand.
Yeah.
Sir, if you could explain to the jury what was going on and the radio traffic and the tenor of your office.
Objection cumulative.
Overruled.
It's kind of hard to describe how you feel when you know that when your partner has been injured.
Your Honor, this objection is not relevant and it's unduly prejudicial, and we're repeating things how he feels.
Suspended. That part of it.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll go forward to the next question.
And sir, can you explain the normal day's radio traffic versus the radio traffic on December 18, 2012?
Normally the traffic for the city of Durham is really busy, but this particular day it was busy, but it was different, especially in regards to the nature of the call. It was just a different feel altogether. I can't describe it, but it was totally different.
And do you recall when you actually, tell me what happened when you responded to 718 Rosetta Drive? 1718.
So we were actually leaving to go back to our office when Sergeant Davidson communicated that he needed some units to assist on Rosetta. And so we were just a few blocks away. So we responded there with the information that we had, and we proceeded to that location, basically. We didn't know what we were going to be facing, but we went, you know, so.
And what were you looking for specifically when you went to that address?
Well, initially, the first information that was relayed through Sergeant Davidson was that it's possible that the suspect may be at 1718 Rosetta. That's the first information that we received. The second bit of information was that they were possibly occupying a black Honda Accord.
And did you know the individual who you were with? Did you know the name of the person that you were looking for?
I did not. I did not.
And what, if anything, did you do when, or what, if anything, did you see when you arrived at the scene?
When we first turned on to Rosetta Drive, we were initially looking for the address, which when we saw the address, we identified the house, we immediately identified the black Honda Accord, which was also relayed to us after the address was given to go and look out for by the possible suspects. And that's what we actually saw when we arrived on Rosetta.
And what did you do next based on your observations?
As soon as we identified the house and the car, we parked our vehicle in a safe position on Rosetta, headed south. We got out our vehicle and we approached the vehicle with our service weapons drawn, not knowing what we could be possibly facing based on the information that we had.
And how did the occupants respond?
What I saw through my eyes were 3 gentlemen sitting in the car. They were very still. And they were looking at me, looking at us as if they were in shock. Almost like they were scared, like they were afraid of our presence. It was not normal. So that kind of raised a red flag to me as to their demeanor. And so that's something that I relayed to my sergeant. And we still approached tactically and we made contact with the vehicle and the people inside the car.
And what, if anything, happened during your interaction with the people of the vehicle?
Well, at the time when we first approached the vehicle, we had assisted by Sergeant Davidson and Officer Dan Keefe. Once we were actually at the car, we began taking them out individually until they were detained and sat on the ground until further investigation.
And what, if anything, happened next in your investigation of this incident?
As it related to my actions?
Yes, sir.
There was one gentleman, and I did not know his name at the time, but he was actually sitting on the ground, and I wanted to get him up so that we could place him into a patrol unit just to have him sit there until we continue our investigation. And when I went to pick him up, I noticed that his left forearm was bleeding. And I asked the gentleman, I said, "What's wrong with your arm? What happened?" And he said that it happened while I was struggling with that officer. So I didn't know, who he was talking about. So I said, "Can you explain what you're talking about? What officer you're talking about?" And he said, "The officer that you're all looking for me for." So at that point, I didn't ask any more questions. I knew he was bleeding, so I just called for EMS to come assist his cut on his arm. And that was all that I did at that point.
And were you able to ascertain the identity of the individual who spoke to you?
Later I did.
And how did you, were you able to identify his identity?
I don't recall exactly. I don't know if it was through our one of our MCTs in the vehicle, in one of the marked vehicles, or I don't know if it actually came from another officer. I can't remember right now exactly how he was identified, but later I was able to identify him as Carlos.
And is that individual who you had that interaction with in the courtroom here today?
It is.
And can you please point him out for the court?
Yes, this is a gentleman with the black suit on, possible pink shirt, multicolored tie to my left. He's a little bit heavier than he was then, but that's that gentleman there.
Your Honor, if the record will reflect that he did identify the defendant in this case?
Thank you. The record will reflect that the witness identified the defendant, Mr. Riley.
And so, did you have any other interactions with this individual or with this case?
No, ma'am. That was it.
Thank you, Your Honor. I have no further questions for this witness.
Questions of the witness, Mr. Charles?
No, I thank Investigator Cook, but I have no questions at this time. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Good. So you step down.
Thanks, sir.
Thank you. call your next witness, please.
Your Honor, at this time, the state will call Investigator Tidwell.
Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you shall now give the court in the case now being heard shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Good afternoon.
Hello.
Could you please state your name and occupation for the jury and the court?
It's C.W. Tidwell, a police officer with the City of Durham.
And sir, how long have you been a police officer with the City of Durham?
7.5 years.
And what, if anything, did you do before you became a police officer with Durham?
College.
And where at?
Northeast Mississippi Community College.
And sir, what are your current is your current position within the police department?
I'm currently assigned to the District 4 Heat Team.
And can you describe what the District 4 Heat Team's duties are?
We address quality of life issues within the community. We do a lot of work with PAC meetings and more proactive activities such as vehicle stops and addressing drug complaints within the community.
So more community-oriented policing?
In a sense, yes. It's a proactive. It's still a part of uniform patrol. We just don't respond to 911 calls. We mainly do more proactive police work.
And sir, were you employed and on duty on December 18th, 2012?
I was.
And in what capacity were you with the police department?
Yes, I was assigned at that point to the District 1 Heat Team.
And can you tell me about the geographic location of District 1?
District 1 is considered East Durham. If you looked at a map, if it ran from Roxborough Road to Gear Street, Andrew Avenue to past Monument Boulevard, that whole section of Durham.
And what were your hours of operation that day?
I was working day shift, so I was working 8 to 6:30, 8 a.m. to 6:30 p.m.
And on that day, did you come in contact with an individual named Carlos Riley?
I did.
And can you tell me how that came to be?
I was in court that day, waiting to see if I was needed. It was my regular court date when I was advised that there was a call in District 2 off Forest Drive about an officer who was injured. And so I left court and responded to the scene and met Mr. Riley later on that day after going to that call.
Okay, you stated that you responded to the scene. Where did you initially respond?
After I left court, I responded to Stadium in Newcastle, that intersection. I believe at the time they were attempting to locate Mr. Riley at an apartment complex over there. Got out of my police car, started walking up to where other officers were, and I was asked to go to the District 2 substation to meet Officer Stewart's family members to give them an escort to Duke Hospital.
And upon receiving that instruction, what, if anything, did you do?
I left the scene at Stadium in Newcastle, and I went to the District 2 substation where I met with Officer Riley's brother and provided them an escort to Duke Hospital so that they could be with their family member. Officer Stewart.
And what, if anything, did you do after you transported Officer Stewart's family to the hospital?
I cleared up and I assisted patrol with answering 911 calls because they were obviously the majority of the patrol units were out on that call. So I cleared off of the call that I was on, which was the Forest Drive call, and responded to a few 911 calls until I later was needed to get placed back on that call.
And when were you placed back on the call involving Investigator Stewart?
It was approximately 1:45. I was advised on the radio that they needed officers at Rosetta Drive to try to apprehend the suspect, Mr. Riley. They believe that he may be at that residence, so I responded over there to assist those officers.
And what, if anything, did you observe when you arrived at Rosetta?
Well, when I got there, they had a vehicle that had pulled up, and I was advised that it contained Mr. Riley and a few other occupants inside that vehicle. So they asked me if I would transport one of the people that were inside that vehicle to headquarters to be interviewed by investigators.
And did you do that?
I did. I came in contact with a gentleman named Mr. Potpourri. I'm not sure what his first name was, but I transported him to headquarters so that he could be interviewed by investigators. And he had supposedly been inside the vehicle that Mr. Riley was in whenever they pulled up to the scene where the officers were.
Okay. And after you did that, what, if any, other duties did you have in connection with this investigation?
I stood by outside the interview room while Mr. Potpourri and Mr. Riley were being interviewed, and the investigators asked if I would transport Mr. Riley to the original incident on Forest Drive to attempt to locate some items that the investigators were interested in recovering. So,
were you advised of what those items were that the investigators were interested in locating?
Yeah, from what I recall, it was a pair of handcuffs and a firearm.
And who asked you to take him to the Forest Drive area?
It was one of the investigators that were interviewing the subjects. I do not remember which investigator it was, though.
And what, if anything, did you do after receiving that information?
Myself and Mr. Riley, I drove him over to Forest Drive, and at that point I stayed in the police car while the investigators walked with Mr. Riley, attempting to locate the items that I mentioned before. And after they were done looking for those items, they asked me if I would transport him back to headquarters to finish interviewing him.
And how long were you out? How long, do you remember when you arrived at Forest Drive with Mr. Riley?
It was probably, I remember it was later in the shift. It was probably somewhere around 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock.
And how long were you out at the scene with Mr. Riley at Forest Drive?
They didn't stay very long. If I recall, it was somewhere between anywhere from 10 minutes to 45 minutes. But it didn't seem like it was much any more later than that.
And do you recall who the investigator was who was with Mr. Riley?
I do not.
And did you have eyes on them the whole time?
No, I stayed with my police vehicle while they were with Mr. Riley doing, trying to recover those items. I didn't take part in that search.
Were there other officers there that you knew?
I don't remember seeing any other officers. I just know I was standing by with my vehicle. I don't remember talking with any other officers at that scene.
And were you or any other officers able to locate any of those items at Forest Drive?
I didn't, and from what I remember hearing, there was no items.
I don't object to what he heard.
I did not locate any items there.
And once you finished at Forest Drive, what, if anything, happened next?
After they told me that they were through searching for the items, I transported Mr. Riley back from Forest Drive to headquarters, and I stood by outside the interview rooms until I was relieved at 6:30 p.m.
Thank you. No other questions for this witness, Your Honor?
Thank you. Questions of the witness, Mr. Chance?
Thank you, Your Honor. We thank Officer Tidwell, but have no questions for the defense at this time.
Thank you. Officer Tidwell.
Thank you.
Sit down.
All right, thank you.
Call your next witness.
Your Honor, at this time, the state will call Officer Keith to the stand.
Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you shall now give the court in the case now being heard shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Sir, could you please state your name and occupation for the court?
Dana Keith, police officer for the city of Durham.
And sir, how long have you been a police officer with the city of Durham?
Almost 16 years.
And in what capacity are you employed with the city of Durham right now?
Patrol division.
And what did you do before you came to the Durham Police Department?
Nurse.
And sir, were you on patrol on 12/18/2012?
Yes.
And did you respond to 17/18, or was that a drive on that day?
I did.
And why did you respond to that address?
I went there to locate a suspect that was involved in a shooting earlier in the day.
And what if any, or when did you arrive at Rosetta?
About 13:09 or 1:09 p.m.
And what, if anything, did you observe?
Myself and Sergeant Davison got there just a couple seconds before I did. I actually passed the location, so I went down and did a 3-point turn to come back. And by the time I came back, Sergeant Davison was on scene. Also, Sergeant Pyatt was there. And they had challenged, they were out with a black Honda Accord, and they were challenging the people that was inside the vehicle.
And when you say challenging, can you explain what was going on, what you observed?
Objection cumulative.
Overruled. Go ahead and answer.
You can answer.
The people that were inside, they were telling them to keep their hands up in plain view. There was 2 people that was already out of the vehicle, and then I think there was a 3rd person that was inside the vehicle.
And were you able to see who was in each particular seat in the vehicle?
Actually, there were 2 on the ground. There was one, the driver, he was laying on the ground by the driver's side door. It was Mr. Dustin Porti. And on the passenger side of the vehicle, on the ground, there was Carlos Reali.
anything did you do after you saw the individuals on the ground?
I took Mr. Dustin Potpourri into custody first. He was searched, and I put him in the back of a vehicle that had arrived on scene. It was a car. It was a heat unit 176. I placed Mr. Potpourri in the back of that vehicle. I then went back and placed Mr. Reali in handcuffs. I searched him, went through his wallet, found the ID with his identification in it, and I also took his cell phone from his pocket.
And do you recall what you did with the items that you took from Mr. Reili?
Eventually I gave them to the officer that was transporting him to headquarters.
And who was that officer?
I don't have a document here, I'm not 100% sure.
And once you placed Mr. Reili into handcuffs and found the wallet and found his cell phone, what, if anything, did you do next in relation to this?
I stood by the patrol unit that had placed Mr. Potpourri in. I stood by there until he was left to be transported for headquarters. And once he was transported, I went and maintained perimeter security on the scene.
Were you ever able to find out the identity of the third person in the vehicle?
No, ma'am. I don't think I had any encounter with him, so I don't have his information.
Thank you, Your Honor. I have no further questions for this officer.
Thank you. Questions of the witness, Mr. Charles?
Yes, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Officer Keith. Your Honor, may I approach just to take a look at the notes the officer was reading from?
Yes,
the
sir.
report? Thanks, sir. Thank you, sir. Officer Keith, that Honda Accord, was it running?
I don't think it was at the point where I made contact with it.
And if it was running, what would be the proper procedure in this circumstance? Should it be on or off?
We would have them to cut the engine, the motor off.
Why?
I do it so that they don't leave the scene. It's
Be dangerous to leave it on.
yes, sir. But I'm not sure if it was run or if it was off. I don't know.
Thank you, Officer Keith. I have no further questions of Officer Keith at this time.
Thank you. Any other questions on redirect?
No, Your Honor.
Thank you, officer. You are free to step down. Thank you. Do you have a witness we can get in about 4 minutes?
I do not, Your Honor, and plus I think that the staff would really harm me if we did try to put on somebody right now.
And I would join in that.
Join in harming her?
I'll leave that to the court's discretion.
It is time for us to take our afternoon recess here. Ladies and gentlemen, remember your special status as jurors, and do not communicate with each other or anyone else about the case. Do not allow anyone to talk to you about the case or talk about the case in your presence. Do not talk to or have any contact with any parties, attorneys, or witnesses. Do not conduct any investigation or attempt to receive any reports, information related to the hearing. Don't go to any location that's been referred to in the evidence. It's just avoid that. And do not form or express an opinion about the case until I give you the signal. to do so. While everyone else remains seated, the jury is excused